to People Like Us, a podcast for and about third culture kids everywhere. I'm Jen Mohindra. I'm also a TCK, and I have a Facebook group for TCK adults called, unsurprisingly, People Like Us. So, hello and welcome to this episode of People Like Us. Today, I'm happy to be speaking with Jackie Harris. So, good morning, Jackie. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really interested to talk to you about this.
Thank you. So, first question that I'll ask is, where did you grow up?
Obviously we lived a lot of time. I was born in Scotland, and we moved to London when I was a very small child. My mother and father were from Glasgow. They came from a very sort of working class background, but my father was very ambitious and wanted more. So apparently me and a dog and my mother were all kind of sort of bundled off in the back of a Hillman Imp down to London in the sort of early 1960s. And that sort of began a new life. And my father chased, good contracts, which took him often away from us all over the world. And sometimes we went with him. The earliest recollection I have of us being in another country, well, I don't know if it actually counts, but I suppose it does, because it was a very different culture, was when we went to the Irish Republic. And I remember we were living in this it must have been sort of quite a sort of a rural area, and I remember being in what you would describe as a one-room schoolhouse, and each row of desks was a different year. And I remember being in that. And the other thing that I remember quite vividly is that I was the only one that wasn't Catholic. And when they were doing prayers, I had to go and I had to leave the room. They threw me out, and I had to go and sort of sit on my own outside, and while they were all doing prayers. And of course, I was only probably about 5 or 6, and of course I couldn't really understand it. And in fact, I didn't tell my mother about that till years and years later, and she sort of, she wished she'd known, because she would have been appalled by that. So I do remember it was very, very, very different, and they spoke strangely, and so that was my sort of earliest recollection of sort of being in another place. And then for quite a long time we were in the UK, and then when I was about 12, we upped sticks again, and we moved on to Canada. And it was the east coast of Canada, a place called St. John, New Brunswick. And when most British people think about Canada, they always sort of think about, sort of Toronto and Vancouver and that side. I very rarely meet people who have been to the east coast, which is incredibly beautiful. It's a bit like, it's where a lot of Scottish settlers went who didn't want to stay in America. When after 1776, they decided that they wanted to, move over the border and still sort of be part of the British Commonwealth. So there's a lot of history of Scottish families and Irish families in and around that area. So we moved to Canada, and I was there for a few years. I went to one of these massive American high schools, the ones where they've got lines of lockers along the hallway. There's a TV series that came out, which was set in the 70s, which was called The Wonder Years. And it's set in it's the story of the sort of little boy who's quite a little introverted little boy who's trying to sort of make his way in it. But the school that he went to was almost identical to the school that I went to in Canada. So I keep having these kind of deja vu moments every whenever I've watched an episode of it. These long rows of lockers. It was massive, and they used to have you couldn't have a school assembly with everybody in it at the same time, so they would have a sort of public address system that sort of came through speakers into the classrooms, which was bizarre. And then anyway, so I was there for a while, and then we moved to Portugal. And we lived in a place called Setúbal, which is a kind of like a sort of peninsula that sits in between the sort of Lisbon and the next stage down would be the Alentejo region, going down to the Algarve.
Mhm.
And I used to every day. So it was quite, because that's when my father was working down in, that sort of southerner part. But the only schools we could go to, I went to the American high school in Lisbon. It was, that was the nearest one that was suitable. And that we used to have to get a hovercraft to school every morning.
Oh, wow.
And if the hovercraft was off because of bad weather, then I kid you not, I would have to get a ferry, and then I would have to get a train, and then I would have to get a bus to get to school every day. And you'd be sort of sat there, sort of people, would take, like, goats and chickens and things, on the boat, and people would move house, by bus. You sort of see people sort of trying to sort of put mattresses on the top. It was because it was quite sort of rural little bus service. It was quite vivid pictures in my head of those times.
That's
And
quite
then after
remarkable.
that, I went to university in Glasgow.
Okay. So full circle back to
Yes, yes.
Scotland.
Well, when you were trying to work out where to go to university from a foreign, what to me was a foreign country,
Mm.
where do you start? And so it seemed logical in my head to sort of try and sort of pick somewhere that had a familiarity to it. And so that's why I ended up choosing Glasgow.
And what was it like going back?
Well, it was. Obviously, it was I was born there, and apart from visiting grandparents, and we never really went anywhere in Scotland. Really, it was just kind of quick visits, and then we would have to be off somewhere else. So it was sort of strange to me, and of course I was strange to them, because Glasgow is one of those cities where people that go to university there, a high proportion of them live at home.
Mm.
And stay there, and so I had this kind of like ingrained tan, from having sort of spent time Portuguese summers, and so I looked very tanned when I got there, even though I'm quite pale skinned. You can just sort of I just had this kind of look, and so that made me sort of stand out, among these sort of very pale, sort of Scottish people, very
Yeah.
pale skinned. And of course, a lot of people, it was, what school did you go to? And of course, then the conversation would sort of come up as, well, I went to the St. Columban's in Carnasheed, Lisbon. And they would sort of like, oh right, okay, well, and because it made me odd.
Mm.
So it took a little while to sort of settle into that, because the people like us that we're talking about here today, we were in the minority. There was one other girl whose family lived in India, and they were from Scotland, and they ran a tea plantation over in India. But apart from that, and then people that were obviously foreign students, that was all there was, and everybody else was kind of just had a normal, same schools all their lives.
Yeah, that thing that is kind of a foreign concept to us who have moved around so much. So what I'm hearing then is that you looked different and you felt different. Again. So, Glasgow University. So feeling different and looking different as well. How was
Yeah.
that?
Well, yes. Obviously, I paled down, sort of, after a while, but I was still, known as, the girl who lived in Portugal, and because you think about this, this was kind of like, the very, it was like sort of between 1979, 1981. And so, nowadays people probably wouldn't bat an eyelid on it, but then, it did make me sort of unusual. And the feeling that I had is just because I didn't want to be the special case, because when you move around a lot, you're always the special case,
Yeah.
you're always the new girl, and I just kind of sort of wanted to sort of feel that I was somewhere that I belonged.
So after university, then did you stay in Glasgow or move on from
Oh
there?
my God, no! I hot-footed it down to London, and I managed to get myself a job in a small advertising agency in between Regent Street and Bond Street. And I was, lived high on the hog, really. I mean, I didn't have any money, but I felt kind of like I became sort of part of a gang. I got myself a little flat in Chiswick, and which was £27 a week. It's sort of like what rents were like in those days. And I shared that. I was only paid half of that. And I had this, nice little job in this ad agency. I was a general dog's body, really, but it was quite exciting. It was quite glamorous as jobs go. Everybody wanted to work in an ad agency in those days, and I somehow managed it. The reason that I managed it actually is because when I was in the interview, I mean, there was like queues of people, lining up for their turn for an interview. And when I got into the interview, there was a motorcycle helmet in the corner, and I remember sort of saying to the man who was interviewing me, is that your bike? Are you a biker? And he said, yes. Why are you interested in bikes? And as it turned out, that the summer before, I had a boyfriend, and we spent the summer in Paris together, and we travelled from Glasgow to Paris and back on his Yamaha RD 400. And so I was able to kind of sort of recite this story, and of course in those days it wasn't trendy for owners of advertising agencies to be bikers, and so and so that kind of got me the job. Which was
like, would you say that the adventurous side in terms of the bikey travel was thanks to your having moved around growing up, your TCK upbringing?
I suppose it's possible, because you do see and experience other things that one of the main benefits of having lived this life is that you see and experience and do things that you would never ever do before. And I remember, when I was, back in, at uni in Glasgow, is very few people in those days had travelled to the USA. And I had, and I had done a Greyhound bus tour, with some friends, where we went from Canada all the way down the East Coast to Florida. And none of my friends had done that, because now sort of 17, 18-year-olds they trek off to Thailand and all kinds of exotic places, but then not very many people did. So that was actually quite unusual.
You mentioned also that when you got to London and to the flat in Chiswick, that you'd found your gang, like your tribe. Did that give you a sense of belonging?
Well, not really. And when I say I kind of sort of found a tribe, I kind of sort of found people that were that were also kind of slightly misfits. That also didn't move to London from somewhere else, who didn't really belong anywhere else. And to be honest, I think that's I don't think that feeling has ever left me. I still even to this day I sort of think I don't know if I really belong anywhere. And it's definitely sort of something there. That like for example, I don't have old school friends in the same way that other people do. I keep in touch with a few of the Canadian people on Facebook, but it's mostly just commenting on photographs of their wedding days and sort of stuff like that. It's not a friendship anymore.
Yeah.
And so and the other thing is I think I've got another thing about my personality that I think comes from this is that I'm completely unemotional about stuff. I have no issue about getting rid of stuff, because we travelled light so often.
Yeah, I can remember the moves of being given however much notice, right, we're going, and not being able to take all of my personal possessions because there wasn't room in the crate. And things that I might have liked to have kept, just wasn't able to. So yes, I definitely hear you on the lack of attachment to stuff.
Yeah. Well, so I definitely have that, and also I think a few benefits that I think I get from it are I can walk into a room of strangers, like at a business networking meeting, for example, and I'm not fazed by it. Sometimes I might be, I get times where I think, I'm just really not in the mood to make small talk. But most of the time I can walk into a room full of strangers and I don't have any issue about, starting conversations. And because growing up, I was always the new girl. And so you have to make an effort.
Mm. So if you're in that sort of situation and you get the classic, where are you from question, how do you respond to that?
I don't go into an awful lot of detail, because normally if it's a business one, people want to know it. They tend to want to know where you're based, what you do, and because I live in Cumbria now, and I don't have a Cumbrian accent. People sort of say, "You're not from here, are you?" And I would just normally just tell them, I spent all of my adult life in London and the southeast, and I just leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't drill into those other details particularly, because I just don't think it adds anything, and then they're not that interested.
Yeah.
If there's a connection sort of comes up, where you meet somebody who has got family in Canada, I might sort of say, oh, that's interesting, I used to live in Canada when I was in my teens. Then I might sort of chat about it then. But apart from that, I kind of just sort of let it be, really, and it's only sort of closer friends who really have any notion of it.
So on that move to Canada, that was, I think, about 12 or 13 you mentioned, so that would have been your first big move. How was that? Because 12, 13, that's a particularly tricky age anyway, and the change in schools, what was that like for you?
It was actually sort of quite traumatic in a lot of ways, and the biggest trauma, probably more for my parents than it was for me, because children are we're more adaptable, really, is that in the UK we start school at 5. In North America they start at 7.
Oh
So
gosh.
from an academic point of view, I was in a class of people that were nearly 2 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So from an academic point of view, that was absolutely fine. But from a social point of view, it was a nightmare for my parents. Because if I wanted friends, then I had to basically up my game
Yeah.
socially. And so I was doing things that and hanging out with people who were 2 years ahead of me in their personal and body development and mental development and everything that went with it. And that was hard. It was hard for all of us, really, I think. I mean, I think I was able to adapt to it probably quicker than my parents, but they were terrified. I was sort of hanging out with 16-year-old boys, and you sort of think, hang on a minute, what's going on here? But that was the reason for it. And there was this sort of talk about, maybe I should go back a class. And I went mad and said, no, I'm not doing that. Honestly, it was just kind of like that. That would have been the worst thing that they could have done to me, in my opinion. Is hang on a minute. I've worked. I was bright anyway. And I sort of thought, well, what's that going to do to me? Having to go back a year. And then, of course, when we went to, we left the Canadian school and went to the American high school in Lisbon. They wanted to try and keep me back a year there too. And, I was what 17 then, and I went ballistic. And she said, I'm just not having that. That's you're taking a year of my life away from me. So that was actually sort of quite hard. Now, it wouldn't have been so bad, because I know that other people that I've met that have had this this kind of lifestyle, a lot of them went to boarding school a lot of the time. But my parents didn't want to do that. They wanted to keep the family together as much as possible, and so I went into local schools. I mean, there were good local schools, fee-paying local schools, when we were in Portugal, but they were there was a lot more adapting, whereas kids that I knew that just went back to, they were only in the foreign country for the school holidays. They went back to their boarding school, and they had a continued education, but mine was actually interrupted at sort of various points and into different cultures. So from the age of about 12, 13, I went from a British school system to a Canadian school system to an American school system in a foreign country, and back to then a Scottish university. So
I,
that
I
was
hear,
quite a lot.
yeah, I hear you on the change of systems. I experienced similar going from the British school system to the Australian school system, and experienced exactly the same in terms of the mismatch of my age compared to where I was up to with my schooling. And I
Yeah.
was put down a year. I should have been 2 years up for where I was up to in the schooling. And as you described, I hated it. It was tough. So when you were moving from school to school, country to country, what techniques did you use to try and fit in?
Um, what I wore was obviously, sort of, a factor, because that was quite interesting. Because when we went from schools in Britain, we had school uniform. Went to a high school in America, and nobody wore school uniform. People just and it was actually a dress parade. It was, people wore different. They wanted to wear different clothes every day, and of course, because I had a school uniform, well, obviously I had clothes, but they were kind of. I didn't have that many. Casual clothes that
Mhm.
you wore your school uniform, and then you had clothes that you went out with, went out for special occasions, your Sunday best, and then you had, a few bits of, sort of scruffy stuff, for romping around at the weekend. But that was actually all I had.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there was this kind of like, I was obsessed with my appearance, which I hadn't been before. And again, because it was just that wanting to sort of fit in. I wanted the right jeans. I wanted, to have the right trainers. I wanted, and it wasn't because of, greed to sort of have, things. It was because they were things that would help me fit in better.
Mm.
And as soon as I hit 14, I got a job working in a petrol station. My parents went mad. I got a job in a petrol station, and of course, then that meant that I had my own money, and then that meant that I could buy my own things.
Yeah,
Um,
appearances at that age terribly important.
yeah, it is, and so that was quite a big thing. There was also the people would come up to me and sort of say, go on, say something, because having a British accent, as in a Canadian, and again it was a part of Canada where people didn't travel that much. It was not a sophisticated. It wasn't like sort of being in Toronto or Vancouver or kind of the sexy places, sort of St. John, New Brunswick, and and so they probably hadn't had much exposure of people that were British coming to live there. And it wasn't a tourist destination, put it that way.
Mm.
And so so that was a factor in making me sort of feel odd, because if I was speaking in class, everybody just kind of stopped and would sort of stare, and and then I just want to just kind of shrink down. It's not like British schools where you could lift up your desktop and hide behind it. We had it was like chairs with these kind of like arm
Oh, the lift up thing,
around.
yeah.
Yeah, there weren't your sort of proper desks, so there was nowhere for you to sort of hide.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course, there's the classic one that you probably a lot of people will tell you this story if they've been in North America as children. Is I asked someone if I could borrow their rubber, and
Oh,
their answer was, who are you going out with?
yeah, language differences
Yeah,
can
so there
be
was some
confusing.
language differences.
So back when we were kids, the moving around, we didn't have the internet, so there was no email, WhatsApp, Facebook. How did you manage the goodbyes?
We used to write lots of letters. We were obsessive letter writers. And I used to write, these pages and pages of letters, and they would all have, hundreds of exclamation marks and, smiley faces and, it was, we had our own emojis in those days. But they were just letter writing, and just on a normal, A4 lined pad, or normally, with about spiral bound, that would be ripped out, and so I'd get letters back from friends in the UK.
Marvelous. Yes, I still have boxes of letters that I wrote from places that have been back in the day.
Yeah, I remember when while we're speaking about letters, I remember when moved from Canada to Lisbon, I would get letters from my Canadian friends, and they would say, "So Lisbon, so where is that? Is it in France, or is that in Paris?" And I remember so suddenly sort of being hit by their lack of geographical knowledge, and it wasn't that they were unintelligent or anything. It's just that in North America they have very limited knowledge about the world around outside of North America.
Yes.
And that struck me when I was about 17, with these sort of letters from people where people just couldn't cope with this. Well, where is that? What language do they speak? And even though I was younger than them, I sort of thought, well, I knew that Portugal, they would speak Portuguese, and I know that it's next to Spain, it's the skinny part next to Spain, before I'd ever been there. So I kind of was a bit kind of shocked, but then that's you kind of realize that I was exposed to things that they were never going to be exposed to, probably.
Yes, I experienced the same myself when I moved to Australia as a teenager, and I had come from Nairobi in Kenya, and nobody knew where that was.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, thinking of other third culture kids that are out there, what would you want other TCKs to know?
I think that it's normal to have this. If you've got this kind of sort of internal feeling that you don't really belong anywhere, then I think it's a normal part of it, and I think we must all feel that somehow.
Yes.
So I sort of think don't beat yourself up over it. It is just, it's part of what you've experienced growing up, and also to sort of think, well, there are a lot of things that you're good at from this experience that other people would never have been exposed to, like being comfortable around strangers and being able to strike up conversations, with people, and always when you're always because you're always the new person. So I think that those are the key things, and I also think it's a good strength that we probably all have of not being emotionally attached to possessions. I
Yes.
think that's probably quite good. I'm quite ruthless at throwing stuff away, and you've just sort of said that you have that, and I'm sure that that's probably a common factor as well.
Yeah. The belonging one is a huge one as well. To feel at home, is it about people or places for you?
That's a very good question, and I don't know that I've really got an answer to that. I suppose, I don't know. The thing is that I have a close relationship with my sister, but I don't have I never had close relationships with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the way that we lived, we didn't see that much of our extended family, aunts and uncles and grandparents and what have you. We never really had that. So it's probably more about just the length of time that I'm in the one place. So I live in Cumbria now. We've been here for about 16 years, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life.
Snap. 16 years in London for me. It's my longest.
Yeah, and this is the longest place that I've ever been anywhere. So I think it's being here and the length of time that I've been here is probably the closest I've come to it. But still, there's this kind of I don't there's just I don't know. It's this. I don't know if it's a physiological or a psychological thing. There's just this thing is I don't really know where I belong.
Mm.
It's still kind of deep rooted in there somewhere.
Mm.
I don't know if I'll ever get I'm probably too late now. I don't know if I'll ever find it. I just think there's just something that's there, and I don't know. Is that common with other people that in this situation, do you think?
Absolutely, yeah. But from the many TCKs that I've now spoken with, that sense of belonging and where to go next. Should I stay? Should I move on? That is extremely common. It's just, it's part and parcel with the experience that we've had growing up. And I think it's a case of how to get comfortable with that in yourself. So if I think of me, I feel like I belong within myself, and myself, I am portable. I can go
Mm.
and park myself in different places, and that's not so important. It's having that sort of feeling of being settled within me,
Yeah.
that helped me to feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah, so I think that's probably it. Is that, yeah, sort of self of being sort of settled in oneself, is it's kind of there, but not quite there. It's just,
Yes.
if you know what I mean. It's just kind of like you can just sort of see it right in front of you, and you're just constantly just trying to reach out for it, and it just you just can't quite grab it. So, but but we are where we are, and our lives are what they are, and so there's a lot of good that's come out of it. But sometimes I am a little bit envious where sort of people sort of talk about they met up with an old school friend,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
we've been friends and close, we've been best friends since we were 4 at nursery school. And I sort of think, I have no idea what that was like, because actually that's another thing, is that I've never really had a best friend in that sense, in the high school girls type best
Mm,
friends. I've never had that either,
yeah.
for
Yes.
sort of similar reasons.
That I understand. I'm looking at the time. The half hour has whizzed by. So to finish on a positive note, what would you say is the best thing about being a TCK?
Having seen parts of the world that maybe people wouldn't. I mean, obviously people travel a lot more, but I was able to sort of see parts of Canada that most British people even today have still never seen. You never know. You never know about anybody else who's been to Prince Edward Island or Nova Scotia, or and all of those kinds of places. So I've been to places that people haven't been to before, and also been able to be entrenched in these places a lot more deeply. So that's
Yeah,
quite nice.
it's it's a very different experience to live somewhere rather than just visiting as a
Yeah.
tourist.
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today, Jackie. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you for asking me. And it's not something that I get a chance to talk about very often. So, it's actually been really interesting. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to People Like Us. If you'd like to join an online community full of people like us, hop over to Facebook and search for People Like Us. You'll find my group, and you're very welcome to join us.